In the summer of 2026, a quiet but profound revolution is taking place in how we think about thinking. It is not happening in a laboratory, not in a lecture hall, and not in the pages of some dense academic journal. It is happening in the minds of millions of people around the world who have rediscovered the work of a man who died nearly 4 decades ago. His name is Richard Feynman, and his philosophy of life, learning, and truth has never been more urgently needed than it is right now. Just last week, on July 1, 2026, a major financial news outlet ran a quote of the day featuring Feynman's most famous words, "I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong." The article noted that in an age of instant opinions and constant information, certainty is often treated as a virtue, yet Feynman argued that true knowledge begins with the willingness to admit what we do not know. His philosophy encourages people to challenge assumptions, examine facts carefully, and stay willing to change their views when new evidence appears. This mindset, the article concluded, is valuable not only in science, but also in education, business, and everyday life. But why Feynman? Why now? What is it about this man, with his rumpled suits, his bongo drums, his irreverent humor, and his refusal to take anything on authority, that speaks so powerfully to a world drowning in information and starving for wisdom? The answer lies in the nature of our moment. We live in an age of unprecedented access to facts, yet we seem more confused than ever about what is true. Social media algorithms feed us confirmation bias. Artificial intelligence generates confident-sounding nonsense. Political discourse has become a battle of narratives rather than a search for truth. In such an environment, admitting uncertainty is costly. But for Feynman, uncertainty was not a weakness. It was the engine of progress. He said, "I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong." He believed that when people cling too tightly to correct answers, they stop asking better questions. Doubt keeps the mind flexible. Uncertainty leaves room for discovery. This is the first great lesson of the Feynman philosophy. Doubt is not a weakness. It is the starting point of all genuine knowledge. Feynman said, "All scientific knowledge is uncertain. This experience with doubt and uncertainty is important. I believe it is of very great value and one that extends beyond the sciences." He argued that, to solve any problem that has not been solved before, you must leave the door to the unknown ajar. The scientist, he explained, has a lot of experience with ignorance and doubt and uncertainty. We take it for granted that it is perfectly consistent to be unsure, that it is possible to live and not know. Think about what that means. To live and not know. To be comfortable with the gap in your understanding. To resist the urge to fill every void with a convenient answer. This is not a celebration of ignorance. It is a defense of curiosity. It is the recognition that the moment you stop questioning is the moment you stop growing. Feynman's own life was a testament to this principle. He was a man of contrasts, lively, irreverent, and deeply suspicious of explanations that sounded good but didn't cash out in practice. He emphasized curiosity and intolerance for nonsense. And when things got too stuffy, he preferred playing the bongo drums. Feynman had a strong instinct to understand things by doing them, not by reading about them. Just as with physics, he didn't want descriptions. He wanted participation. Curiosity didn't need justification. As a teenager, he repaired radios without schematics. In his last act as a public figure, he exposed the cause of the 1986 Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. Despite being ill with cancer, he cut through NASA's flawed reasoning, insisted on speaking to engineers rather than administrators, and demonstrated O-ring failure with a simple glass of ice water on live television. In his mind, fixing radios and explaining the Challenger disaster were the same problem. In both cases, authority had obscured reality, and a simple experiment was enough to reveal it. That story, the Challenger investigation, is perhaps the most powerful illustration of Feynman's philosophy in action. The disaster emerged from a failure of the O-rings, the rubber seals that joined sections of the solid rocket boosters. Engineers had warned for years that the O-rings failed in cold temperatures. Launches had been approved anyway. NASA executives had convinced themselves that the risk was acceptable. They had allowed a culture of complacency to obscure the truth. Feynman refused to accept that. He took a piece of the O-ring material, dropped it into a glass of ice water, waited, and removed it. The rubber was brittle and had lost its resilience. On live television, he demonstrated that the O-rings failed at exactly the temperatures present on the morning of the launch. No equations, no jargon, no appeals to authority, just a man, a piece of rubber, and a glass of ice water. This is the Feynman method. Reduce the problem to its simplest form. Ask what you can actually see and touch. Do not let complexity become an excuse for confusion. Do not let authority silence your own observations. Feynman had little patience for prestige, authority, or explanations that couldn't be tested. He famously said, "It doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is, how smart you are, or what your name is. If it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong." In that simple statement is the key to science. But Feynman's philosophy extends far beyond the laboratory. It is a philosophy for living an honest, meaningful life. He famously said, "You have no responsibility to live up to what other people think you ought to accomplish. I have no responsibility to be like they expect me to be. It's their mistake, not my failing." He turned down prestigious offers, including a lifetime position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, because he said the place was too rarefied, too disconnected from the messy, noisy, imperfect world. He preferred to teach freshmen at Caltech. He preferred to eat lunch in the cafeteria with students who asked naive questions. He preferred the chaos of real life to the sterile quiet of pure thought. This brings us to another essential element of Feynman's legacy: his commitment to what he called cargo cult science. In his 1974 Caltech commencement address, he warned against research that follows all the apparent precepts and forms of scientific investigation, but is missing something essential. He cautioned that to avoid becoming cargo cult scientists, researchers must first of all avoid fooling themselves, being willing to question and doubt their own theories and their own results, and to investigate possible flaws in a theory or an experiment. He said, "The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool." This is not a casual observation. It is a warning. Your own brain is wired to protect your ego, to weave stories that make you look good, to remember successes and forget failures. You are the easiest person to fool because you are the one who most wants to believe in your own rightness. This principle of not fooling yourself has become so influential that it is now being applied to the most cutting-edge challenges of our time. A June 2026 paper in Frontiers in Digital Health draws on Feynman's foundational principle of scientific integrity, articulated in that same 1974 Caltech commencement address, to develop a practical, disclosure-oriented ethical framework for AI in digital mental health. The neurodiversity paradigm provides a critical stress test. Growing empirical evidence indicates that AI tools trained on narrow behavioral and linguistic norms carry substantial risk of misrepresenting neurodivergent users. The paper proposes 5 criteria for what it calls the Feynman honesty standard: scope clarity, population limit disclosure, uncertainty communication, role integrity, and participatory co-development. The analysis concludes that the field will be judged not only by algorithmic performance but by its candor about what these systems know, miss, and cannot do. Feynman's voice is shaping the future of technology, even decades after his death. What would he make of AI today? The question is not merely hypothetical. It is being asked by researchers, ethicists, and technologists who recognize that Feynman's skeptical, curious, rigorous approach is exactly what we need to navigate the promises and perils of artificial intelligence. You can imagine Feynman sitting in the last row of a darkened auditorium, notebook in hand, watching carefully. On the screen, colorful animations glide past, neural networks glowing, data flowing, arrows pointing confidently upward. A speaker explains that the system understands language, reasons about the world, discovers new knowledge. Each claim is met with nods and polite applause. You can see Feynman being tempted to rise and ask a deceptively simple question. How do you know? He would listen for the moment when someone explained what the machine does when it fails, or how one might tell whether it truly understands anything at all. He would notice that the demo works flawlessly, once, and that no one asks what happens when the input is strange, incomplete, or wrong. He would hear words doing a great deal of work, and he would wonder whether they correspond to anything real. This is the Feynman method applied to the greatest technological challenge of our time. He would not be impressed by the hype. He would not be swayed by the confidence of the experts. He would ask the simple, devastating questions that everyone else was too polite or too intimidated to ask. But Feynman was not just a skeptic. He was also a man of profound emotion, of deep and abiding love. His first wife, Arline, died of tuberculosis when she was only 25. They had met while in high school, spending summers on the beaches of Far Rockaway where Feynman grew up, and by junior year, he knew he wanted to marry her. While he was a graduate student at Princeton, they became officially engaged. Around this time, Arline began to suffer recurrent symptoms of a mystery illness: fevers, pain, and large lumps that would appear and then disappear. After the initial fear of a cancer prognosis, Arline was diagnosed with lymphatic tuberculosis in 1941. Doctors did not expect her to last more than 2 years. Feynman finished his Ph.D. in 1942, and despite their parents' protest, the couple married in a civil ceremony on Staten Island. With no friends or family present, the young couple embarked upon their ill-fated marriage, which could not even begin with a proper kiss for fear of Feynman falling ill himself. Directly after the ceremony, he took her to Deborah Hospital in New Jersey and visited her there every weekend. In 1943, J. Robert Oppenheimer invited Feynman to join the team at Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico as part of the top-secret Manhattan Project. While Arline was Feynman's first love and soulmate, physics was his life's calling, and the opportunity at Los Alamos was not one that he could pass up. He wrote, "I have, however, other desires and aims in the world. One of them is to contribute as much to physics as I can. This is, in my mind, of even more importance than my love for Arline." Arline died on June 16, 1945. Feynman was devastated. A year and 4 months after her death, he wrote her a letter that was sealed in an envelope and stashed away. After Feynman's own death from cancer, biographer James Gleick found the letter in a box of papers. It is one of the most moving documents in the history of science. He wrote, "Darlene, I adore you, sweetheart. I know how much you like to hear that. But I don't only write it because you like it. I write it because it makes me warm all over inside to write it to you." He wrote, "I want to tell you I love you. I want to love you. I always will love you." He wrote, "I find it hard to understand in my mind what it means to love you after you are dead, but I still want to comfort and take care of you, and I want you to love me and care for me." And then, at the very end of the letter, he wrote something that reveals the depth of his honesty, his refusal to pretend that loss did not hurt. "Please excuse my not mailing this, but I don't know your new address." This is the unsentimental yet deeply human wisdom of Richard Feynman. He did not try to airbrush his feelings into something comfortable. He did not pretend that loss did not hurt. He simply observed his own heart with the same honesty he brought to physics. And he accepted that pain is part of the deal. If you want to care about things, you will sometimes hurt. That is not a reason to stop caring. It is the price of admission. Now let us turn to the practical heart of Feynman's philosophy. How do we actually apply this way of thinking to our own lives? The answer lies in a simple but profound practice that has come to be known as the Feynman Technique. The core idea is devastatingly simple. If you cannot explain a concept in plain, simple terms, you do not really understand it. The technique is based on the idea that true understanding shows up in clear explanation. It transforms passive learning into active learning, making it easier to grasp, retain, and apply new knowledge. The Feynman technique works in 4 repeatable steps. First, choose a concept you want to learn. Second, explain it in simple terms, as if you were teaching it to a child. Third, identify the gaps in your explanation, the places where you struggle to keep it simple. Fourth, Go back to the source material, fill in the gaps, and simplify again. Repeat until you can explain the concept with perfect clarity. This is not just a study technique. It is a philosophy of intellectual honesty. It forces you to confront what you do not know, to expose the gaps in your understanding, and to rebuild your knowledge from the ground up. Feynman himself often rejected the idea that he possessed some magical intellectual gift. What separated him from others was not an impossibly high IQ. It was a simple daily mental habit that he practiced relentlessly. His thinking habit was not based on memorizing more facts. It was built around understanding ideas from their roots. The legendary physicist believed clarity came from breaking difficult concepts into simple pieces. His approach showed that intelligence grows through curiosity, patience, and honest questioning. Many people see genius as a rare gift. Feynman viewed it differently. He believed strong thinking came from a disciplined relationship with learning. His method focused on removing confusion instead of collecting complicated information. What made his approach famous was its refusal to accept hollow explanations. If an idea sounded sophisticated but didn't actually make sense when explained plainly, Feynman treated that as a red flag, not a sign of depth. Every concept had to pass one test. Could it be explained in simple terms? His edge wasn't just what he knew, but his willingness to take knowledge apart and put it back together in his own words. At the core of his method was starting from scratch. Instead of accepting an explanation at face value, he would dig into why something worked the way it did. This is the essence of first principles thinking, cutting through assumptions, traditions, and borrowed opinions to get at basic foundational truths. This is the lesson that Feynman learned from his father, who took him for walks in the woods and taught him that knowing the name of a bird in Italian, Portuguese, Chinese, and Japanese taught you absolutely nothing about the bird itself. The name is not the knowledge. The label is not the understanding. The real knowledge lives in the details, in the observation, in the patient, honest work of figuring things out for yourself. His father taught him to observe nature directly and distrust jargon. Two formative lessons stayed with Feynman. Knowing the name of a bird tells you nothing about the bird, and the word inertia is merely a label, not an explanation. Even as Feynman grew up and learned more about the physical world, he would never forget his father's lessons in observation and patience. So how do you live a life guided by Feynman's philosophy? It is not complicated, but it is difficult. First, cultivate the habit of asking, "How could I be wrong?" about everything that matters, not once, but repeatedly. Second, follow your small curiosities without asking whether they are productive. Read about something outside your field. Learn a skill you will never use professionally. Wander mentally. Third, strip away jargon and labels. Describe the world in the simplest terms you can. If you cannot explain something to a 12-year-old, you do not really understand it. Fourth, embrace the embarrassment of being a beginner. Let yourself be clumsy. Let yourself ask stupid questions. The stupid question today is the insight tomorrow. Fifth, separate your identity from your beliefs. When someone shows you a flaw in your thinking, treat it as a gift, not an attack. You are not your ideas. You are the process of questioning those ideas. And sixth, remember that the universe does not care about your reputation. It only cares about what is true. And the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is always more beautiful than any comfortable lie. Feynman died in 1988, but his voice still echoes in every lecture hall, every laboratory, every quiet room where someone sits with a problem they cannot yet solve. He would not want you to worship him. He would not want you to memorize his quotes. He would want you to do what he did. To look closely at the world, to ask your own questions, to make your own mistakes, and to find your own joy in the act of understanding. He would want you to watch the bird, not the name of the bird. The bird. And then maybe to smile and say, "Isn't that interesting?" This is the heart of the mind of Richard. It is a philosophy of radical curiosity. It is a refusal to accept easy answers. It is the courage to look silly while trying to understand something. It is the humility to admit that you might be wrong. And it is the joy of finding things out, not because you have to, but because you cannot help it. Feynman called curiosity a disease. He said, "I have this disease. I need to know." But it is the most beautiful disease in the world. It is what separates a life of passive consumption from a life of active creation. There is a final story that captures the essence of Feynman's philosophy better than any other. When he was dying of cancer, he wrote to a friend about his last few months. He said, "I have lived a wonderful life. I have loved deeply. I have been loved in return. I have learned more than I could have ever imagined. And I am grateful. I am so grateful." There is a humility in those words, a wisdom that comes not from years of study but from years of living. He was not afraid of death. He was not afraid of the unknown. He had made his peace with the universe, not because he had all the answers, but because he had learned to live with the questions. And that is the invitation. The universe is vast, cold, and indifferent. It does not owe you an explanation. But that does not mean your life has to be empty. You have the power to create meaning. You have the power to choose joy. You have the power to be curious, honest, and brave. You have the power to love, even when love ends in loss. You have the power to try, even when trying ends in failure. You have the power to hope, even when hope is the most fragile of human emotions. You have the power to watch the bird, not just to memorize its name. And in that watching, in that paying attention, in that act of deep and abiding curiosity, you will find everything you have ever been looking for. So go ahead, pay attention, ask the question, follow the thread, make the mistake, admit the error, try the new dish, let go of what is holding you back, embrace the unknown, and remember, always, the words of Richard Feynman. I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. That is the mind of Richard. That is the only motivation you will ever need.